Hello and welcome to the Poetry Exchange. I'm Michael Shaeffer.
And I'm Fiona Bennett. It's lovely to be here and to be getting ready to put this episode out into the world, and indeed putting it out into the world. Ooh, weird sort of sense of timing there.
I think you're still a bit giddy following our evening in the company of poems, Fiona.
It's got to be said, as one of our audience members said, I have been floating on the river of poetry ever since.
Oh, that's good.
I know.
Yeah.
I know. There were a few writers in the audience, I suppose. So.
I mean, listen, we did have a little bit of technical issues. However, I like to think that they didn't get in the way of what was quite an extraordinary evening of poetry.
It was indeed. I think one of the other observations that somebody said, which definitely proves that it didn't get in the way, although it did for you and I a bit, is somebody said it felt like the readers were just talking to me. And I liked that idea of, poetry reading being a moment of communication. I think sometimes we can think we need to kind of declaim the poem, or the poem is outside of us or something. This is not right. So I was very, very heartened to hear that people felt the connection and the communication of the poems. And we were so blessed with that wonderful troupe of readers. We all had a great time.
We did, and it absolutely was. As you mentioned there, Fee, I think on the evening you and I weren't particularly able to fully appreciate what our readers had done, but I watched it back later that evening and I was absolutely blown away by our readers. I think it's only right and proper we name check them now. Sasha Dugdale, Roy McFarlane, Roxy Dunn, Patterson Joseph, Andrea Vitsky-Slott, and Kieran Hines. Is that everyone? That
is absolutely the lineup.
And your good selfie, of course, read incredibly beautifully, but it was fantastic to watch. So yeah, huge thanks to all our readers, just to kind of say that publicly again, for giving us their time and for reading so beautifully. It's funny, I was talking to someone earlier today, Fiona, actually, about how the P word can get in the way a bit sometimes, poetry. It can be a bit of a block. And I really recognise that. That resonates with me. And yet, when you get past the block, when you get through it, it is just communication and at its most powerful. Yeah, it was a terrific night, yeah.
And our huge thanks to the amazing audience and followers that came, and all the messages that we had from people, and obviously, the support that is in there, not just in the donations in the form of the tickets, which makes literally without which we cannot be here doing what you and I are about to do now, which is to share another incredible conversation. But the sort of support that is more than that, which is the leaning in, the engaging with poetry in this way, the celebrating of, as you said on the night, the life-affirming act of reading poetry. Much thanks to everybody for being part of our community. It's really, really a great pleasure.
Talking of great pleasures, Fee, we had the very great pleasure of talking to the fantastic poet Glyn Maxwell a number of weeks ago, not long ago now, and we had the most incredible conversation that we're really, really pleased to be able to share with you all today. Fee, do you want to say anything more, or shall we just hit play?
I think maybe we should just hit play. Let's let the man himself take us in. So you'll be listening to myself and Michael talking about Acquainted with the Night by Robert Frost, the poem that's been a friend to Glyn. We have the poem, which is great.
Yeah.
Will you give it a read for us?
I have been one acquainted with the night. I have walked out in rain and back in rain. I have outwalked the furthest city light. I have looked down the saddest city lane. I have passed by the watchman on his beat and dropped my eyes, unwilling to explain. I have stood still and stopped the sound of feet when far away an interrupted cry came over houses from another street, but not to call me back or say goodbye. And further still, at an unearthly height, one luminary clock against the sky proclaimed the time was neither wrong nor right. I have been one acquainted with the night.
Oh, fantastic.
Fabulous, thanks.
Yeah.
Frost is hugely important and influential to me. And this one, it's not the loveliest, it's not the happiest, it's not, in a way, it's one of the darkest. And there's a lot of dark poems in Frost. Shall I tell you kind of my history on it? I mean, I came out of university very kind of lazy and with a sort of callow, slick kind of, oh, I can write poems, let's do that. Let's be clever and difficult and all the things people are at that age. And it was when I was in Boston and I was Derek Walcott's student, and he turned me on to Auden. You know, he couldn't believe that I didn't know much Auden. So then I absolutely delved into Auden and got to know it all really well, and it was hugely important for me. And then at some point I was writing poems into magazines, and they were sort of joking about, you know, I remember the guy at Verse in Scotland said, we'll take this poem from Glyn Maxwell, we'll take this one from W.H. Maxwell. And I thought, okay, he's taking a piss now. And it does, does now sound like an Auden tribute act. And it's something I've got to stop. I loved what Auden could do formally, because I felt that he had the whole of the history of English literature in his ability to wield form in the right way and the most powerful ways. But Auden also was profoundly intellectual and like knew an awful lot in history, psychology and religion, and he had an awful lot in his quiver that I didn't have. When I started to read Frost, I thought you could sense somebody walking across a field. You could sense the air in Frost. You sense the weather and the light in Frost. Whereas Auden, I always thought was looking from above, in the most beautiful and the most astute ways possible. I mean, I've always thought that Auden is kind of by far the wisest poet of the 20th century. But Frost in his own way is up there too. But it's not all from book learning, as he might have put it. So when I sort of immersed myself in Frost, it wasn't so much reading, it was listening. I got one of those old Caedmon vinyl, records that they made in the 50s and 60s, and it was all in Frost's voice. It was a very ringing and resonant voice. I thought he read really well. But my acquaintance with Acquainted with the Night was really from just listening to it over and over. And it was quite a lot of years after that I started to realise how central it is to me. Because I think when I started as a student, when I started teaching sort of 30 years ago, I just had an instinct that there was something about formal poetry that was to my taste, that was my temperament, and I didn't understand really unpatterned poetry, or free verse as people sometimes call it. I didn't really understand that. I didn't see how it could be particularly memorable, and actually I still don't. And I've now lived long enough to see it not being memorable, and certain elements of it not surviving their generation, as far as I can see. But the years of teaching and of writing it as well made me much more open to other styles, much more open. And it was particularly these last years of teaching, the spectrum of different styles you get in the students. I learned from that all the time, and I still can't accept a poetry that has no sense of form, but I can definitely take poetry where the form has sort of been shattered or fragmented, as long as there's a shadow of or an echo of what form has been shattered. That I can always get.
That's incredible, that listening, the sound of it and the listening to it. Yeah. Right from the beginning of having the records and even just hearing you read it and hearing you talk about it, you can sort of feel the importance of that sonic aspect of the form.
Yeah, absolutely. I hadn't been thinking about that, but you're absolutely right. That just even the scratchiness of the record, that I'd recorded with all the scratches. So the white space around the poem was actually that sort of crackly silence that you get on records, and I do remember that. Yeah.
So that's really interesting to me, because that thing of the crackling on the record and that space. And you were talking earlier about the difference of Auden and Frost, and the sense of presence is the difference, is that you feel it's alive more in the Frost, that you are there on the street. Can you go back to kind of that early falling in love with poetry? Was that aspect of poetry important to you, that idea that somebody could, in a few lines on a page, make a space come alive?
I don't think consciously.
No.
I think I entered into poetry in a fairly different way to most people. I think it started with the Romantics. The first poet I was trying to emulate was really Byron. I wanted to be funny and formally complex at the same time. So when I started writing, I wrote like it was the 1820s. I really did. And I'd look at the big anthologies of the day from the 80s, and I just thought, I'm never going to fit into this, because I just thought, why aren't they writing about sunsets in rhyme like I am? Why aren't they doing that? Because they're still beautiful and rhyme's still beautiful. So I began in quite a nostalgic place, I think. But what then happened is that the reason Auden hit me with such impact via Walcott was that Auden showed that you could keep the forms alive and make them sound contemporary, but you could also talk about telephones and motor cars, which obviously Byron couldn't. So I was nervous about doing that until I came across Auden. Auden was the answer to everything. Now you can write about the world you know, but it became how do you wield form in the world you're in? And the reason Acquainted with the Night is central to that thinking is that it's about the most formal Frost poem there is, because not only is it a sonnet, it's not a classic 8 and 6 sonnet, but it's still a pretty classic sonnet. It's also in terza rima, and it's really tight. It's all full rhymes, and it's all...
Sorry, Glyn, what was that word you used?
Terza rima. Terza rima.
Could you explain that?
Yes. So it's third rhyme. It's the stanza form that all of the Divine Comedy is written in. So what it has is, if you look at the Frost, it's the rain, the second line, rhymes twice more.
I noticed that.
On the fourth and the sixth.
Yes.
So the rhymes go every other like that, and the end is a couplet, but usually terza rima goes on for reams and reams. But it's an incredibly sort of woven form. Acquainted with the Night is in 3-line stanzas or tercets. You'll see that the middle line of every stanza brings in a new rhyme.
Yeah.
The first line is the second iteration of that stanza, and the last time you see that rhyme, it's at the end. So it's a mathematical pattern, but to me it's always seemed as like DNA. It just like rolls on like timelessly, and that's how it works in Dante. And my feeling about the metaphor of that form is that the new rhyme arrives. It's not a rhyme when it first arrives, because it's not rhymed with anything, it's new, and it's like a new thought. And then the second time it comes is at the top of the next one, and then it's like that thought developed. And then the third time, it's like that thought left behind. So in the meantime, another thought has come in and taken its place. So it's a kind of metaphor for the way thoughts roll in and are with you, and then they go away again. And I also think it's a great walking meter. And of course, Acquainted with the Night is literally a walking poem.
Yeah.
It's literally, you can hear him walking through the night in a small American town with no one around.
And something about that idea of the way the thoughts arrive that you've just described also feels very pertinent to the night.
Yeah.
That somehow things can kind of arrive and then something else comes in to take its place, and that feels very in the middle of the night, that sort of liminal space.
Yeah, when your thoughts aren't competing with anything. They're sort of left alone to just move as they will. In fact, this is one of those poems that I almost feel should be printed in white on black paper.
Yeah.
Then you'd really get it. I think you'd really feel it. So to go on with Acquainted with the Night, I felt that given, it's all very metrically regular, and the rhymes obviously regular because it's terza rima, and they're very simple rhymes, and the vocabulary is simple, and at the same time, it feels absolutely psychologically acute and authentic and true. It doesn't feel like anything is being sacrificed to make the form work. And the more I thought about form, the more I wrote about it, the more I taught, the more I wrote the poems, I felt it's corporeal. It's bodily. Form is bodily. It's an expression of the creature, whether it's the footsteps of meter or the breaths of the lines, and then what you can do by then varying them. In terms of making a psychology.
Yeah, you're really putting me in mind of how when, as an actor, when you work with Shakespeare, you become aware of how much the form is telling you. And those moments when he breaks from the pentameter, that there's a reason for that. And that it is physical. Form is physical, and the voice is a physical thing, as you say, the breath and all the rest of it. And it's they're completely indivisible.
Yeah.
And one informs the other. And yes, that's absolutely what's going on here.
And he's gliding around that in this poem, isn't he? Because there is the person walking, but there's also the scene. There's also, there's what's around. So in a sense, the scenery is also has a heartbeat. Yeah, I guess that's what I'm trying to say.
It's remarkably coloured in, isn't it, as a landscape, given how austere the poem sounds, and it comes from this sort of thumping, sad, sounds like a voice of depression or dismay and so on. But you can further city light, saddest city lane. You see it all, and there's all these rhymes that end with. Night, rain, light, lane, beat, explain, feet. And then you have this, in the third stanza, you have this new rhyme, cry. And it's the first time it's open, the first open vowel in at the end of any line. And of course, it's when far away an interrupted cry. So then that is him hearing something from another street, came from houses from another street. It's the one open thing until you get to goodbye and sky, obviously. And there's this fantastic one luminary clock against the sky. And then, the most famous repetition in Frost is obviously miles to go before I sleep and miles to go before I sleep.
Yeah.
And I remember having the revelation that because that wasn't a repetition, because the second time you say it, you're saying it in a world where it's just been said before, so it could hardly be less of a repetition. It made me think actually there is no repetition in poetry, that once you deploy a word a second time, it's not really the same thing at all. And this is a very good example of that. To start the poem with "I have been one acquainted with the night," which is like just sort of saying that at a cocktail party. Yeah, I've been one acquainted with the night. But then you get this poem, sort of dark existential misery, and by the end it's "I have been one acquainted with the night." The hell yes. Now you know what he means. You know what he means. There's some desolation and insomniac desolation that he experiences a lot, and the choice of acquainted with the night. I love that, acquainted with the night.
And he doesn't say I am, I have been.
Yeah,
I have
it's
been.
a really great use of tense, isn't it?
Yeah.
And then the first 5 lines of this poem start with I have.
Yeah.
I have been one acquainted. I have walked out in rain. I have, and they all those first 4 are just simply sentences. The line is a sentence.
Yes.
As if I can't say more than this. I can't go further. I've walked out in rain. Then there's a dash, which is almost like describing his walk, and all it ends with is back in rain. So it meant nothing. It did nothing. I've outwalked the furthest city light, but then the stanza ends. There's a break. It's like, so that white space between the tercets is like, well, that led to nothing too. I've looked down the saddest city lane. And then so you sort of see that the lane, but again, nothing comes of that. I've passed by the watchman on his beat and dropped my eyes, unwilling to explain. Explain what? He doesn't say. Just whatever it is, he won't explain that either. And then I have stood still and stopped the sound of feet. I think that's amazing too. I've stood still and stopped the sound of feet, because somehow the sort of echo, after he says stopped, he still says the sound of feet. Yes. Which is an odd way round. So I guess it's the sound. It's both the echo of his feet on the street. I've stood still and stopped the sound of feet. So it's also the echo in the head, I think, when you're alone at night. Yeah.
Will you keep going for me?
Yeah.
Because I'm
poem.
Yes, please. Because I'm sort of intrigued.
And stop the sound of feet. When far away and interrupted cries. Then you have that lovely open vowel. So he stopped and then.
An interrupted cry.
An interrupted cry, yeah. So there's something dramatic going on somewhere that doesn't involve him. It came over houses from another street. This is another important thing for young new poets. is how plainly you can describe something. Just say houses, just say another street, and everyone has a picture. Everyone gets that somehow. They get their own houses and their own street, but you don't need any more. You don't need any adjectives. Came over houses from another street. And then another break, and the break there, the white space there, is that about me? Is that someone calling me back? Or someone saying goodbye? And the next line is, but not to call me back or say goodbye. So the return of the line stamps that out, but not to call me back or say goodbye. So no human connection there. And further still, further away than those other houses, at an unearthly height. And then that one luminary clock against the sky. And of course, sky it's almost an onomatopoeic word, isn't it? Because it's open like that. You look up, stars, and then just space. One luminary clock against the sky. The last white space, proclaimed the time was neither wrong nor right. Full stop. I have been one acquainted with the night. It's kind of the seal on it. I think it's kind of perfection to me, this poem.
You know that what you were saying about the thoughts and the terza rima, and it's like it comes and then it's processing, isn't it? It's that idea of processing, which is also what you do when you're walking, you're processing. For you, where does it begin? You know, is he looking for something? Is he troubled with something?
I think he is troubled with something which he never explains to me or to the watchman. There's definitely a sense. It's not exactly a cry for help. It's a cry. I think it's a cry, but it's the sort of cry where if you encountered this man, I always like to try and dramatise poems. With poems this good, you can see it. So here, with Acquainted with the Night, it's encountering a guy somewhere who you've asked him, so Mr. Frost, do you like them? Do you spend much time at night? Do you go out? I mean, there's some sort of innocent small talk question, and the answer is, I've been one acquainted with the night, and he never explains what he means by that, but he tells you the experience of it, and then by repeating the first line at the end, it's almost like saying, that was a stupid question. Yes, I've been acquainted with the night. I think life is terrifying.
We do always ask people that we talk to, Glyn, if this poem were a friend to you, what type of friend would it be?
It doesn't think I'm a friend. It doesn't.
It's not bothered about you.
Yeah, it's not bothered about me. Perhaps I'm the watchman. Perhaps I pass him on the street, but in the day. I pass him on the street, but in the day. And he doesn't drop his eyes because he's got an errand to run. But he doesn't really tell me anything, and he doesn't stop to talk to me. So I suppose you'd have to say, and this is the obvious thing to say, it's somebody in the village who I would really like to get to know better, but sort of sense I never will.
Oh, that's perfect.
Who kind of remains enigmatic.
Yeah, but I sort of feel I've learned a lot from that guy. Yeah. I projected a lot on him.
Acquainted with the Night by Robert Frost. I have been one acquainted with the night. I have walked out in rain and back in rain. I have outwalked the furthest city light. I have looked down the saddest city lane. I have passed by the watchman on his beat and dropped my eyes, unwilling to explain. I have stood still and stopped the sound of feet, when far away an interrupted cry came over houses from another street, but not to call me back or say goodbye. And further still, at an unearthly height, one luminary clock against the sky proclaimed the time was neither wrong nor right. I have been one acquainted with the night.
That was Michael with the gift reading of Acquainted with the Night by Robert Frost. A huge thanks to the fabulous Glyn Maxwell for hosting us, in fact, for that conversation and giving as he always does, so generously, of his incredible insights, his passion for the creative force of poetry, I want to say. There's many things you could say about Glyn's work and his teaching and his wisdom, but the passion of the creative force of poetry, I've really felt that in the conversation with him, and it was a real privilege to sit with him with that particular poem. And I hope everybody's enjoyed listening as much as we enjoyed being there and recording it.
Yeah, that was it was really wonderful to hear it back, actually, Fee, and to revisit that fantastic afternoon we shared with Glyn.
So it's coming towards the end of the year, but there's still a few more things to be done. And we are going to be planning a day of open slots for people to book in and have an online conversation with us about the poem that's been a friend to them. So if that's you, if you like to talk to us, tell us the story of connection that you have with a poem, just get in touch via the website. Let us know that you have a poem that's been a friend to you and that you'd like to talk to us about it, and we'll do our best to find a slot.
Yeah, we'd love to hear from you. We have in fact heard from one listener who has suggested that we might find space and time within the podcast for an extra poem. And we thought, well, that's an excellent idea. I'm sure we can. So we're going to say goodbye. But after we've said goodbye, there will be an extra little bonus poem this month. And hopefully that's something we can do every episode. So enjoy that. You'll be hearing Fiona read Emily Bronte's Love and Friendship. Until next month, thank you for listening.
Love and Friendship by Emily Bronte. Love is like the wild rose briar, friendship like the holly tree. The holly is dark when the rose briar blooms, but which will bloom most constantly? The wild rose briar is sweet in spring, its summer blossoms scent the air. Yet wait till winter comes again, and who will call the wild briar fair? Then scorn the silly rose wreath now, and deck thee with the holly's sheen, that when December blights thy brow, he still may leave thy garland green.